Hey everyone, welcome to session 77 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. I'd like to start today's episode with a sincere expression of gratitude. You see, it's been 3 years, or just 3 years and a few days to be precise, since this podcast launched in February of 2016, and it's just been an incredible ride. And I am just deeply grateful for everyone who's taking the time to download and listen to these episodes, all the guests who have taken time out of their busy schedules to answer my questions, and certainly the sponsors who help make this show possible. So, it's just been, again, an incredible experience, extremely reinforcing from my perspective, and it's caught on much beyond my wildest dreams. I think we crossed the million download mark about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And again, I had an idea that there was a market for this, but I've just been incredibly humbled by the response to which people have found this show and found what we're doing here helpful. So again, just thank you very, very much. And in today's episode, I have a very special guest, one of the people who has been on the show many, many times, and that is Dr. Pat Friman. And he joins me today in an unusual format. What I did is I have this membership program I don't talk about too often on the program, but is a monthly membership group, if you will, and about every other month we get together and do a Zoom call, and I usually bring a former guest on, and the members get to ask questions directly of these folks, and Pat was kind enough to join us for a members hangout several days ago, and I thought it would be great to share this with you, and like I said, Pat's been on the show a number of times. He's been very supportive of this podcast, and so we get to pick his brain essentially for about an hour and a half or so, maybe a little bit longer. So we get into all sorts of stuff, ask him all sorts of personal questions about his routines, and even down to what he does for exercises and things like that. So yeah, it was a fun event. I'm glad the members had a chance to participate in it. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, you can go to behavioralobservations.com and just click on membership to get more information about that. I can't promise we're going to have Pat Friman on every time, but it is a fun group, and I'm really grateful for their support. All right. One more announcement before we get to today's show is that the ACT Bootcamp for Behavior Analysts is coming up. That's being held in Reno, Nevada, and there's still time to get on board with that. That's taking place March 7th through 10th, and it will feature many podcast favorites like Steve Hayes, Mark Dixon, and Evelyn Gould, and many, many more. And so this is a deep dive. This is full immersion training in acceptance and commitment therapy geared for the everyday practicing behavior analyst. And I think all told, there are about 32 CEUs available for this. So you can pretty much knock out almost all your professional development requirement by attending this bootcamp. So again, if you're interested in that, go to behavioralobservations.com and go to the show notes for this episode, and I'll have a link to that, plus a $50 coupon for podcast listeners. So I think that's it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, I hope you enjoy this podcast membership hangout with Dr. Pat Friman.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now, here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Pat, I am beyond excited to have you here. Some of your episodes have been some of the most downloaded ones that we've had in the 76 or so episodes that we've published. So the 3 that you've been on have been very impactful. I get lots and lots of comments to folks, especially the one we talked about more self-care and things like that. I think that was session 16, the second one we did. I get a lot of great feedback on that. But anyway, so to have you here to answer questions directly from folks in our cohort here is just a treat. So thanks for joining us this morning.
Well, actually, it's a treat for me too, Matt. You're excellent at this. You're a great interviewer, and I'm just actually delighted to be part of the group this morning, part of the hangout.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit yesterday about how this works. And so what I want to do is I'll probably ask like a question or two first, and then we can get into the questions here. So I am tempted to talk about the video that you did with Ryan O'Donnell a few weeks ago at Cal Ava, but I think there's going to be plenty of other questions on that. So let me start with something a little bit different.
Okay.
This might be one of those things that I guess, how shall we say, one of those things that people might not know. So when we were trying to set this up, I said, well, we should do these in the evenings because that's when people are off work and can attend and things like that. And you said, yeah, well, there's a problem with that. I go to bed at 9 o'clock and I get up at 3 a.m. Now, I have to imagine that there's some sort of routine or some sort of logic behind this. And I've heard different stories of very, kind of various people who, have these, let's just call them unusual type of routines, I guess, or practices as it relates to that. Can you give us a little bit of insight in terms of what this is all about? Do you like get up and do like a workout, or do you do your writing at that time, or what's the rationale behind this?
I come to the Boys Town campus at 3:15 and go to Pal Rank Fieldhouse, which has a fabulous fitness center for our football team, our basketball team, our girls' sports teams. And the kids will sometimes be coming in there at 5. So I can have a key to that facility and use it as long as I'm out of there before the kids come. So I go at 3:15 and I'm out of there by 5. And so that's the regimen. And I do that 7 days a week.
7 days a week?
Mm-hmm.
What is the, if you don't mind sharing, what is the Pat Friman kind of exercise routine? What do you typically do?
Well, I rotate. It's pretty standard. I do pushes on one day, pulls on another day, legs, and then cardio and CrossFit stuff, and then do it all over again and just keep rotating.
I see. And are you like a barbell guy or a machine guy?
All of that. Then jump rope and TRX. I've got a lot of equipment, and there's a lot of equipment over there at the gym. So I'm usually the oldest guy in any group that I'm part of. So I'm just trying to stay with the pack, not necessarily ahead of the pack. And I think fitness helps.
How long have you been doing this type of regimen?
This particular regimen, 5 years. I've always had some kind of regimen, but this one's pretty rigorous.
I see. But with regard to like getting up early and getting at it and stuff like that, has that just been how you've been living your adult life, or?
Early, but not 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I go to bed at 7, so I'm not very fun at parties because, good parties don't end at 7.
I guess that's the opposite of whatever that saying is. Like bad things happen after 2 a.m. I guess that would be the opposite extreme of that. So
I give my wife Saturday, and so tonight I'll stay up however long I need to stay up, whatever we're doing together.
Very cool.
But I always get up at the same time every morning, no matter what time I go to bed at night. Sometimes at these ABBA events, those can roll into the evening. And
no, really?
Just a few hours later, I have to get up.
I see. Very cool. Very cool. Well,
Cal Ava was painful.
Oh, really?
The social was, yes.
I see. I have not been to Cal Ava, but from what I saw on social media, it looks like it was a rockin' good time, as they say. So
it was fantastic. I don't usually go to the social, but I did. And a couple of people came up to me while I was at the social and said, "Be careful, Pat. They all have cameras."
Okay. All right.
They kept pushing me into the middle of the circle, to do some kind of weird dance. And I went along with it for a while. And then I realized there were a lot of cameras out.
Did they capture anything that might be regrettable? I haven't seen anything, I guess, posted. Not that I'm.
Well, that's the kind of news I want to hear.
I see. All right. So maybe we can solve that mystery today. So I don't know. We'll see. All right, cool. Well, I've had plenty of opportunities to chat with you. So I want to yield my time, if you will,
okay,
and give people a chance to pick your brain here a little bit. So Just to kind of remind everyone, so I guess the format that we're going to do today is to just, kind of pop your questions into the Zoom chat, and we'll just kind of go through them in order. And when you do ask your question, introduce yourself. If you want to give a little shout out to where you work, please do that. Tell Pat what you do, and then ask your question. And then we'll try to proceed through these questions in some sort of quasi-orderly fashion. So, all right. So I'm looking at the top of the chat here, and I think our first question says, I'm talking about C-sections. I don't know if that's a question for you, Pat. That might be a different. Yeah. All right. How are you feeling, Megan? All right. So let's get to an actual question for Pat here. All right. Angela, unmute your microphone, please, and let's chat with Pat here.
All right. So I'm just wondering what you do with sleep problems. We've got a lot of kids that sleep in their parents' beds, and sometimes we'll put in some reinforcement schedules, and things will work when we're there, and as we're checking up, but then they slip back into sleeping in the bed again. Mm-hmm. So and sometimes we're very successful, and things will work, and then sometimes they just slip back and forth, and I can understand because sleep deprivation is such a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, bear in mind that the population of children that we serve here in my clinic are typically developing.
Okay.
But we do contend with this problem very frequently. But we do it in a non-aggressive manner. First of all, 3/4 of the Earth's population's children sleep in the family bed. So it isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's some downsides to it in this culture that don't exist in other cultures. In a lot of cultures, like agrarian cultures, for example, everybody sleeps together in a pile at night.
Yeah.
And in those agrarian cultures, there are no self-stimulatory habits to speak of. Like if you showed a woman from the Digo Indian tribe a pacifier, she wouldn't know what you were showing her because they don't use them. They don't have any thumb sucking or skin picking or hair pulling or body rocking or any of those kinds of self-stimulatory patterns of behavior, those fill-in behaviors, because there's nothing to fill in. The kids have like virtual round-the-clock skin-to-skin contact with their caregivers. Yeah. So they get stimulated in that way. But in these industrialized cultures, there's a lot of in-betweens to fill, and kids fill those in-betweens with some of these repetitive behaviors. And my point about that is that regular skin-to-skin contact that occurs all the way around the day isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just doesn't fit in this culture very well. So I try to explain to parents the effect of having their kids sleep in their bed on the children. It also has an effect on the parents themselves. It influences the extent to which they can engage each other intimately, and what do they do with the child on those evenings. There's usually a difference of opinion about whether or not the kiddo should be in that bed between the parents, and that's a problem. But for the kid, him or herself, all the other kids that are going to bed on their own at night are practicing doing something they don't want to do every day. They're practicing something that they're kind of afraid of every day. And as a result, they're doing what I don't want to do and doing what I'm afraid of operants start to develop. But the kiddo that sleeps with their parents is going the other direction. They're not practicing those behaviors, and so they fall behind on that kind of self-developmental, independent performance repertoire. And that's about as far as I'll go. I will offer parents a program if they want to start separating from their kids. We usually use some variation of the bedtime pass, which I'll just describe briefly. I'm assuming most people know about it, but I'll describe it very briefly. For the bedtime pass, we give the kiddo a pass, put them in bed, and they can use the pass to exchange for one request to be satisfied. It could be to have a drink or visit to the bathroom or a hug, or in this instance, just to sleep in the parent's bed. Once they surrender their pass, they no longer have it. For this program, what we do is let the child turn the pass in the morning if they still have it for some kind of a reward. But the only way they'd have it is if they stayed in their own bed. And that works for some families and works for some kids. Otherwise, we just use the tincture of time and sometimes go all the way to just shy of 10. And then just shy of 10, we'll try to make a case that the kiddo's now going to be a pre-teenager, life's going to change, they're getting more grown up, and it's time to do things more independently and try to persuade the child on that basis and the parents on that basis. But it's a soft sell. Once people get hooked on that, it's kind of hard to unhook them, and I never want to take a righteous stand about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Makes sense.
The other thing is, I'm not a parent, but I think I have a reasonable understanding about the relationship between mother and child in particular when it comes to bedtime, when it comes to upset. And what the mother and child have done together is arranged for the child to have a couple of operants that mom can't ignore. They've sifted through a whole bunch of operants that she can't ignore. So the child might try a couple of little whines, nothing happens. Tries a couple of little cries, nothing happens. So those get left out of the repertoire. But maybe they say something rather extreme, like, I'm choking in here. Mom goes right in. So the kid's like, okay, I'm choking works. And that goes right into the repertoire.
Yeah.
And so this kiddo has stuff in the repertoire that by definition mom can't ignore. Are you following me here?
Mm-hmm.
And we come along and we say, just ignore that stuff. Already by definition, it's stuff that you can't ignore. So I really have to kind of catch mom in a different frame of mind and use a different attack on that problem. Because I never want to have a parent feel bad about their parenting practices.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
All right. So as indicated earlier, there's a question about the pink sweater mom. So Megan, why don't you take it away here?
Okay.
All right. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday, Pat. I'm Megan.
Welcome.
I do a bunch of different things, but I really appreciate all of the work you've done in the field. I, along with probably everyone else on here, absolutely love the video you did with Ryan with the Daily BA at Cal Lava and shared your story of failure. And a lot of people are just wondering if you ever had an opportunity to see the pink sweater mom again, or if there was any follow-up, or if that was just kind of one of those lost opportunities and you've tried to improve on in the future.
Yeah, it's a lost opportunity. It was years ago. The day it happened, I did an all-day workshop and then went to dinner with the staff. And during the dinner, they told me about her. And then I had to get up very early in the morning and leave. I think I was in Quebec. I can't remember what Canadian city I was in. I think it might have been Quebec province. And had I had another day in town, I would have made an attempt to give her a call or meet her or talk to her, but I just left town and kind of left it behind me. I didn't even think about it again for some time until this organization called Little Star in Indianapolis asked me to come out and give them their staff rally day, an inspirational talk. And that hadn't been my repertoire previously. So I started hunting around in my experience for stories that might illuminate the difficulty of our work and the difficulty that parents face and the difficulty that parents sometimes face with us. And that story just came back to mind. And so I used it that day and got a nice effect from it. And so I've used it intermittently. Ryan kind of took me by surprise. And I agreed to go on camera, but I didn't know exactly what we were going to talk about. And he said, well, I want to ask you, when have you failed? And that story just came to mind. So the basis of your question is, did I ever get in touch with her again? And I did not. And the opportunity is now lost.
Pat, would you just give us like a quick rundown of that for those who might not have caught that? And we can certainly,
sure.
Someone can kind of link that somewhere in the chat too. For those.
Yeah, I was up in Canada doing a workshop for parents of children on the autism spectrum. And my host told me that the parents, some of them anyway, were going to seem angry and frustrated, not with me, but because they're not getting any services. Because up in Canada, services are free, but they're in such demand. There's like this big waiting list. These parents are on that list. And so they're a little frustrated. And they said one of them tends to be kind of hard on speakers, but we don't think she's going to come. So I'm up on the stage putting on my microphone, and one of the hosts comes up there and goes, pink sweater, pink sweater. So she's basically saying she's here. So I start talking, caution the audience to hold their questions until the break, think that'll handle it. 2 minutes in, a pink sweatered arm shoots into the air. She asks me a question that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, only has to do with her issue, her personal concerns with her kids. Privately, I'm thinking that she's rude and selfish about this, but publicly, I answer a question. I don't go into public punishment mode. 2 more times, same thing happens. Privately, I'm kind of blaming her for being rude and selfish, but publicly, I answer her question patiently. But the 4th time it happens, that's it. And that's it. And I answered her sarcastically and dismissively, and she left at the break. Then later that evening, I found out about her circumstances. And they told me that she was a single mother raising 2 small children on her own, which, that's a sacred being right there. And that the 2 children were profoundly delayed and she wasn't getting any services. The only chance she had to get services was to come to these workshops and try and get something out of the speaker. So in light of that, I realized that's not selfish. The only shot she had that she was willing to look bad in front of hundreds of people just to get something for her kids, make their life better. And that's not selfish, that's selfless. I just didn't see it. I didn't know her circumstances. Had I known them, I would have had a much different approach. And in that video, what I was trying to make a case for is that's the basis of our field, is to take circumstances into account when we're trying to evaluate behavior, which leads us away from trying to blame people and punish people for problem behavior, because we're not trying to fix the blame. We're just trying to fix the problem. And the problem is ultimately fixed by fixing the circumstances. So in my opinion, our field has basically got a primary quest, and that is to get that view of behavior out into the world. And there's an old way of thinking about behavior, which puts the source of behavior in the person, him or herself, in their morality, their psyche, their character, their personality, whatever, and allows us to blame them when things go wrong. We're trying to correct for that. But that old way of thinking has been around for thousands of years, and it's used by billions of people. Our view has only been around for about 100 years, and it's only used by a few thousand people, so we have a lot of work to do. That was the basis for that little clip. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Pat. That was a good rundown here. So I just wanted to make sure people were up to speed on that. It was a great video, very powerful. And I think the message was spot on here. So, all right. Celia, are you next?
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Celia.
How are you? It's good to see you again. I saw you at Rider University. I don't know if you remember, maybe several months ago.
Yeah,
we had a back-to-back. That was an amazing treat for all of us. I don't really have a question, but I'm always trying to sort out social media to learn new stories that you might be sharing with the world. So, I was hoping that you can share that. And I just wanted to say that, I read your article on public speaking, and I try to use those strategies, and they have been very helpful.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Because I hate public speaking. It's probably very aversive to me, but
yes.
I still don't like it.
Yeah.
But I force myself to do it.
Good for you.
And I've been really learning to be very comfortable at it.
Well,
comfortable at the aversive.
Yeah, I got it. Although that's not the game plan. The game plan is not comfort. The game plan is just get the talk done. And bear in mind that every one of us is a vector for the delivery of that way of looking at behavior, the one I just discussed. And there are only a few thousand of us. So it's really important that all of us are good at speaking, because as we speak, we're delivering that way of thinking out into the world. And once it's out there, matter doesn't die. Energy doesn't die. We don't know where it's going to land. The more of it there is, the more chance there is that our idea will ultimately disseminate widely. So I'm always happy to hear about people taking public speaking on, because that's a very powerful way to communicate with large numbers of people. So I appreciate that. Anyway, so you were asking for an anecdote or a story?
I don't think I really have a question listed above. So sorry, but I wanted to just hear more different stories and your experiences with dealing with parents who might have very competing and difficult contingencies that makes it very difficult for them to engage in actions towards getting those positive outcomes for their children. So I think that is probably one of the toughest challenge that we have in parent training, because we simply do not live in those contingencies. We meet with them in our sessions and we say goodbye, and we hope that they will take up on some of the strategies that we are recommending. But a lot of times they don't move in the speed that we would like, and of course that's okay. But sometimes they revert back to engaging in behaviors that actually move them away from the outcomes, the direction that we want for their children. So a lot more parenting strategies to hear from you will be great.
Okay. Well, I can think of at least one, maybe two. One is to recognize that just because somebody has asked you for some kind of help doesn't mean they're looking for help. My experience with thousands of people that I've seen clinically over the years is that a very large percentage of people that come in to see me purportedly to get some kind of advice are really there just to be understood, because there isn't anybody in their world that fully grasps them and what they're going through in their life and how difficult it is. And once they have that experience with a human being, they're much more, I don't know what the word would be, cooperative or pliable. But if that's their purpose, but they don't state the purpose, it can be missed by us. And then we go right down the fix-it route, and we're giving them advice, corrective advice. When they're not there exactly to get advice, then we find out they're not being compliant with the device or with the advice. And you can end up with a problematic relationship, which could be corrected if we recognize the function of their original visit. So my strategy is to try and detect that when that's the case. So for example, the mother with this pink sweater, clearly she had a very, very difficult life, a very difficult set of circumstances. And had I been more understanding of her circumstances, I think she would have been less rude with her questions. So I don't know, that's one. I don't like to call it a strategy. It's more like a stand that I take with people, and it's consistent with our field. It's trying to find the function of the behavior in front of you. And somebody is formally asking for advice, but functionally only there to be understood. It's really important to know that. The second thing is, I ultimately ask every client I ever see some version of the following question. And that is, what's your life about? What's your purpose? Why are you here? When it's all said and done, what do you want to leave behind? If you die before me and I'm chosen to give your eulogy, what do you want me to say? And if I'm talking to a parent, I want to go after the same thing. What's their ultimate aim for their child? What's their purpose for their child? What do they hope for with their child? If everything worked out fine for their child, how would that look? And if you can get them on that track and you're clear that the things they're doing with their child are not necessarily good for their child, they're likely to see it before you even bring it up, because whatever they're doing may be inconsistent with what they'd like to accomplish with their child. And it'll go much more smoothly if it's revealed to them indirectly rather than directly. And all of a sudden they see, oh, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't, as in the example earlier, maybe I shouldn't be sleeping with my child, since my game plan for my kiddo is to have them be more independent, and them sleeping with me every night isn't going to get them independent like that. Am I answering your question?
Yes, you actually, address several areas. So my past experience with some parents is that, timing is one thing. Like you said, they're not really ready to get the solution. And sometimes understanding their function. So I have a parent who is always asking for help, but I think that what I am meeting for her is that I'm giving her attention. Yeah. So in her situation, and she has other situations and issues going on with her life, that time with me is attention. And I find that once I recognize that, I provide differential reinforcement. So I give her more attention when she actually engages in the behaviors that we want her to engage in, and mediocre attention when she's just asking the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure it does.
It took some time to figure that out.
Yeah.
Good for you. That's hard.
Good. Yeah, that's a good strategy.
Hey, I know Darren. Darren's here, and he's got to go very quickly.
Okay.
So, Darren, do you have a minute to pop your question in there?
Yes, thank you, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Dr. Friman, I'm sorry. I'm going to my doctoral class in just a few minutes, but
Okay.
I wanted to ask you a quick question because I'm very honored to speak with you about dealing with parents to stop using punishment. Punishment is, in society, we tell people it works. It doesn't work exclusively. Can you give me a quick or some resources to point to me to how to convince parents not to use punishment or coercion instead of, and use reinforcement instead? We're not well educated.
Okay.
Thank you.
First of all, Darren, forgive me for this, but I want to correct something you said.
Go ahead.
There's a word called punishment, and there are circumstances that bring the word punishment into our conversation, and that's very well defined. It's the administration of stimuli that produce a reduction in the occurrence of a behavior.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Punishment, by definition, works.
Yes.
If it doesn't work, it's not punishment.
Right.
You follow what I'm saying? It's an operationally defined term. But is it an effective way to manage behavior? That's really ultimately the question. And I think taking a stand against punishment as a method for changing behavior is going against nature.
Okay.
Nature is a very punishing teacher and a very powerful and effective teacher. Nature is much more effective at getting children to wear coats than any parent ever will be.
Right.
And I could give you lots of examples where nature teaches us what to do and what not to do. Nature has taught us balance because every time we fall, it punishes us for being awkward or careless in how we walk around on the earth. But there's some side effects when you use punishment with children.
Right.
But not if they're used in balance.
Right.
So we have a system here at Boys Town where we use a token economy, and we maintain a ratio of point fines to point awards, which is about 5 to 1. 5 awards, 5 reinforcing interactions, 5 rewarding interactions for every punishing or fine-based interaction. And that works pretty well for us. And so that's what I aim for with families, not to eliminate their use of punishment unless it's over the top and abusive, then I have to do that. But rather to try and have them use far more reinforcing strategies along with whatever their punishing strategies are, so that over the course of the day, the ratio for the kiddo is dominated much more by reinforcement than punishment.
Right, so maybe I should have said coercion instead of punishment. Let me give you one quick example. So I have a mother who wants to cancel her child's birthday because he's not doing in school.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we get that all the time. Well, how old is the kid?
He's in kindergarten, 5 years old.
And how far away is his birthday?
A couple of weeks.
That kid probably can't benefit from contingencies that have more than an hour or two span between them.
Right.
So canceling his birthday 2 weeks from now and telling him that now is just going to upset him now, and teach him something about what's going on now, and not teach him whatever it is, the lesson that she wants him to learn when the punishment is actually executed. So I wouldn't necessarily try to deter her from using, I don't know, a punishment-based system. I'd try to encourage her to use something that is almost immediate in time. And I don't know how big how big is the behavior? What kind of problem is she trying to solve?
He runs away. He hits people. He doesn't hit people hard. It's a little tap. I mean, it's still not right that he's putting his hands on people, but.
Well, I'd also tell her that she is building memories in her child's life. And if she cancels his birthday, he will never forget it.
That's true.
Does she want that in his memory bank? Or maybe she could reach for something that might be easier for him to forget.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Friman. I will tell her that on Monday.
Okay.
I'm sorry that I have to go.
Okay.
I'll reach out to you via email. Thank you, sir.
Okay, you bet.
Thank
Go
you,
to
Matt.
class. Tell him you were talking to Pat Friman.
I will. Thanks.
It'd be a perfect excuse to be late, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
I
guys.
sent you an email. Thank you for something else. So
Okay. All right.
Thanks, buddy.
You bet.
Emily, are you next?
I think so.
Hi, Emily.
Hi. So I'm Emily. I'm in Portland, Oregon. I work at a clinic called Building Bridges, providing ABA services mostly to children with autism, mainly because our state insurance bill requires funders to cover that for children with that diagnosis.
Excellent.
Which is great, although we used to have a wider range of populations that we served before that. So I hope that will change soon. And I've been heavily involved in our state chapter of ABAI, so we're working on that.
Okay.
I have two questions, but I don't want to take up the time, so I'll ask the first one, and then if there's some time a little later, I'll ask the second one.
Okay.
So my question was just a personal one. I've been in the field since 1999 and in various roles working within ABA, caring for lots of other people's children from typically developing to very atypically developing. Yeah. And next week I'm going to become a mom for the first time. And I'm getting a lot of advice, suggestions, people talking about, well, wait till you see when you're trying to put your kids to bed. All the way to, you're such an amazing BCBA, you're so great with the kids, you're going to have no problems. Obviously, neither of those things are going to be what actually happens, but I wanted to know whether you had any, I guess, more kind of act-like advice for me kind of moving into this new role and not setting too high expectations for myself, but also trying to be kind of the best BCBA parent that I can be when I'm dealing with all those kind of typical childhood issues like sleep and feeding and everything that you deal with as well.
Well, bear in mind that the strategies that we impart to parents are being imparted because they have a problem they want to solve. And let's knock wood here and say your child isn't going to have those problems. So it isn't absolutely necessary that you use those strategies that you would typically prescribe for the parents that come to see you. Mm-hmm. And we've got this sense in this culture that these kids that we're raising are inherently vulnerable to all kinds of threats to their well-being. And it's a false perspective. They can go out and eat dirt and play with sticks and have a late bedtime and sleep in the morning and eat gummy bears for dinner and still have a perfectly balanced life ultimately. And I'm not suggesting you do all those things. What I'm suggesting is broaden your view of what a good childhood actually is to include the things that formerly were included in good childhoods that are now excluded because there's so much helicoptering and cocooning going on. And give yourself a break. I'll tell you my view on your child. Let's say your child is a typically developing child. In order to make it in the world, he or she only has to be loved in a way that they recognize by one person, and that'll be enough for them. I mean, if they have more, great. But if you just have one, that's enough. And then they only have to make it in one environment. They can bomb at home and do well in school, and that'll be enough to get them into their adulthood. Or they can bomb in school and do well at home, and that'll be enough to catapult them into their future. I've got a little, you can't see it, but I've got a little plaque on my wall. It's a summons from the Cascade County Courthouse to me when I was 17. And I went, and I was put on probation, house-based arrest for a year. And the two boys that were in on the crime that was committed both went to reform school for that year. I have it right at eye level so that when parents sit in that chair, they look at it. Because the parents that are sitting in the chair think that their child's life is over if they get a D. And what I want them to see is, look, that was a big deal in my life, but I'm doing pretty well. And so that's my thought is, like, don't overamp on little out of the ordinary or the commonly expected issues of childhood. That you get beyond those. Don't overamp on that. Try to set a regular bedtime. Try to be consistent. Be loving, as I know you will be. Expand their food preferences. Make sure they go to a good school. Don't helicopter. Don't cocoon. Use a behavioral principle here and there, and use what feels good in the other places. I suspect everything will be fine. And after you've done all that with this one, then you'll have a second one perhaps, and you'll realize you did way too much for the first one. You know, a mother, she's got her first child, kid gets the sniffles, off to the ER they go. But a mother of 12 with a 12th one comes up and got a broken arm. Mom looks at it and says, that's not a compound fracture. Set it yourself. It'll be like that. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Nobody knows more about raising children than a mother of 12. They know way, way more than we know.
Yeah.
They know when to hold them and when to fold them.
Yeah, and Lauren, I think, I mean, the comment about not helicoptering, and then some comments as well, like from Celia, to let them fail, to learn from those mistakes. And I think those are really important. And both my husband and I shared those values. He grew up in a really, really small rural town with maybe 1,000 people. Yeah. I grew up in New York City. Very, very different environments.
Yes.
And yet we both had childhoods where we were out on the street playing with our friends, going to the park alone, all this kind of stuff that now people are not.
What? Unsupervised play?
Yeah.
You had unsupervised play?
Yeah.
Can't believe it.
He's like, a play date? What's a play date? Just going to play with my friends. Anyway, so, but I think that's something that I don't necessarily think enough about in relation to the families that I work with, that I'm trying to think more about in terms of sort of the impact that always having somebody supervising and looking for those problems has on the children's ability to develop to resilient adults, whether they have special needs or not. So.
Here, watch for this. When your little one is learning how to walk and he or she falls down, watch for when they look back at you to see if they're supposed to cry.
Right.
Because the source of their upset is going to be sometimes their parent and not what they actually feel, because the parents have intervened and they don't know what's going on. But if you leave them to their own devices, they'll just pick themselves back up and keep on walking. Anyway, thanks for the question.
Sure, thank you.
That was awesome, and best of luck, and I can't wait to hear how everything goes. So.
I'll let you know.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. Miguel, I think you're up. And if I skip anyone, please shoot me a message in the chat. So I'm trying to monitor several things simultaneously. And so if I may skip over someone inadvertently. So.
Thank you, Matt. And hi, everyone. I think I mentioned in the chat box that I loved Pat's keynote address at Calava. Especially in contrast to last year's keynote address. It was very inspiring. And I also wanted to mention that not only was I inspired by the keynote address, but just equally impressed with the fact that Pat did maybe another 4 presentations or so after that keynote address on the same day. And then he was seen in the dance floor at the social later that day. So just so impressed with you, Pat. But really, as someone who, for the past few years, has had the opportunity to be in multiple conferences a year, 5 or 6 conferences a year, wow. In conversations with my peers, I see, I guess, a pattern of very contentious conversations about whether you have a stance on a particular, I guess, standard of practice, things related to, for instance, measurement or the way in which you explain language.
Yeah.
And things related to assessment, and and different stances on whether are you a researcher or a practitioner, or where do you place most of your emphasis as a behavior analyst, and how well-rounded you need to be. So basically, I appreciated that your message at the keynote was to have a unified message, right, as a field. And so I'm wondering, as someone as influential as you are, whether you would have any suggestions, or do you have any plans to get us as a field to get to a point where we agree on most things, and maybe there can be nuances, there can be subspecialties, but at its core we are kind of on the same page.
Yes, I got it. Yes, it's my mission, actually. The central purpose of my career is to fundamentally answer that question for our field, because my view of our field, it has a purpose, and we all share that purpose, regardless of what we're doing, regardless of our position on assessment or positive peer support or punishment or reinforcement or Skinner versus Cantor or Brian Iwata versus Greg Hanley. Everybody in the field is up to this one thing, whether they know it or not. And they're all striving to make the world a better place, especially for people less fortunate than themselves. All of the work flows to that. And so everybody in the field is part of that. And all it takes is to recognize that person you disagree with about some small matter like assessment is up to something much, much bigger than that in their day-to-day life. And when it all cashes out, they'll have made a significant contribution, even if they weren't very good at it, because they represent a way of thinking that hasn't existed before. And its widespread dissemination could change the quality of life for human beings on this planet. Because we've had thousands of years of blaming people for problems and then punishing them when they become blameworthy. And our field has a different way of looking at things. And if it were widespread, everybody would be a little more understanding, a little more compassionate, a little more merciful. And so when you're interacting with somebody in the field, just try to recognize that even though they have some silly notion about some idea that you cherish, that's a small matter compared to what they're really up to, what their career really means, what their influence will ultimately be. Even if they're not very good at the field, they're still so much better than anybody outside the field would be. And I think we just need to take time to recognize that we're a fairly small group and we're all up to some really important stuff, and we're all doing it our own way. Am I answering your question?
Yes. Definitely you are, and I appreciate that. That's your mission. And I'm hopeful, right, and optimistic about us maybe getting on the same track as a field. It's just it got to be somewhat disconcerting to me that given that I'm attending so many conferences, just seeing my peers, maybe I would say waste time.
Waste time. Yeah. Waste valuable time.
Yes. Sure. And a lot of people that I respect and admire, but then they don't have the same ways of explaining things, and most of their time seems to be spent on trying to prove their own points. And so I would wish that those people, because there's a lot of ambassadors of some of these frameworks that don't necessarily have mastery of those frameworks, but they're the ones also disseminating the information almost in a dogmatic way, right? And so I wish that maybe the leaders could step in and have a dialogue publicly.
Yes.
So that people are, get to see those debates and get a better informed decisions about how to practice in the future.
Yeah.
And just to see that the leaders are also having a healthy dialogue, and it's not just about just gathering your people from your own community and your own camp.
Right. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Be that guy.
Well, I don't know if I'm the person, because I have to say too. I've been in the field for for over a decade, but still struggle with all the information that is now available to us. To consider myself an expert in all those areas to be part of that debate.
But I'm not saying be an expert. I'm saying be that guy. What I mean by that is you have a view. It's an ambassadorial view. Be the embodiment of your idea. From this day forward until it's all over. And you'll never know how many people that will influence, but it will definitely influence people. And things tend to be infectious. They move in ways that we don't even recognize. So just be that guy, and then we'll know at least one person is going in the right direction. One person has unity in mind. And who knows, that one person may spawn other people. And pretty soon you may have a movement. So start being that guy. That'd be my advice for you.
Thank you. I will steal that quote, Pat. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'll be that guy.
Okay.
It's a great topic, Miguel. I always wonder, like, how do we avoid confusing students and young practitioners, with these different tribes, if you will. Verbal behavior versus RFT, standard acceleration charting versus equal interval, as you said, Pat, the kind of standard functional analysis versus the ISCA, et cetera. So, it's a great topic, and I think it's one that we need to continue to talk about.
Well, the thing to recognize is everything you just said has value. All of those things produce value. There's just this reluctance to recognize that somebody that has a position different than one's own produces value. It just produces the value in a different way. I think if the people in the field had their focus on more distal concerns rather than proximal concerns, like what are we ultimately trying to accomplish in the field, not what we're proximally trying to accomplish. Some of the dissension, some of the conflict, some of the disunity would disappear. It's the same in every human life. If you pay attention to day in and day out stuff too much, then you better hope that day in and day out stuff goes your way. But if you have your attention on your fundamental purpose in life, the day in and day out stuff doesn't matter as much. I don't think Martin Luther King got really, really upset when his household ran out of toilet paper, because he had his attention on something much, much bigger than whether or not there's toilet paper. But if somebody's got their attention solely on what's happening in their day-to-day life and there's no toilet paper, it could ruin their day. Well, I think what I'm recommending for our field is to become more purpose-driven, and that might help with a lot of that conflict.
Awesome. All right, LaAsia, I think you're up next. Let's hear your question for Pat.
Hey guys, I'm LaAsia from North Carolina. I'm sorry my video is so dark. I don't know. I tried to fix it, but sorry. I kind of was piggybacking off of what you already kind of said as far as the advice of making our field purposeful. But a lot of times I get in situations, for example, I was in an IEP meeting recently, and one of the ladies openly in front of a group of people says, well, we usually don't work with ABA, but it's a special, you're a special exception or something along those lines. And I try not to take things personal. And then at the end of the meeting, she had me sign the document, but she listed me as a daycare provider, which I'm not undermining daycare providers, but I'm not one. I'm a BCBA. I was a BCBA in that role. So it felt like an insult. So when I was very down, and I cried a little bit in the car before going to my next session. And I didn't want it to affect me that way, but it did. And I know, like you just said, it's more to what we do, it's purpose. But when those situations happen, do you have any special advice how you work through outside of just self-talk and how to handle that type of, I call it disrespect. But.
Well, the person is predisposed against the behavior of the world, and there's a lot of that. And there's a tendency to want to take that on and correct their view. to go after misrepresentations of our field by making the person that purportedly misrepresented us, making them wrong. I don't think that's very effective. Now I'm going to use a religious metaphor to make a secular point. You see what I'm saying? I'm not like proselytizing here. I'm not preaching here. I'm just going to use Jesus Christ as an example to make a secular point. When he began to speak what we now call Christianity, not everybody that heard what he had to say agreed with him. Not everybody that he met accepted him. And I don't know anywhere in the Bible where he went out of his way to make people wrong. He just became the embodiment of his own idea and gradually recruited more and more followers. And that's what I recommend. And so you get in the meeting where somebody is dissing behavior analysis or dissing you for being a behavior analyst. If you become defensive and postural and positional, you actually are making their argument for them. Whereas if they see something they didn't expect to see in your repertoire, which is rising above the immediate conflict, it could cause a change of heart in them. That's a tall order, but it would definitely have an effect on everybody watching what's going on. Because I'll tell you about showing anger. Showing anger in public is like wetting your pants in public. Everybody sees it, but you're the only one that feels it. And it doesn't really have that much of an impact.
Well, I wasn't really angry, and I responded very, respectful, and I did. But when I left, I wasn't really angry. I was more sad.
You're upset, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you took it personally. Mm-hmm. It's not personal. What you got to see was how what she was saying affected her. And that's how I recommend listening to people. Listen to people to see what they're saying, see how what they're saying affects them. Don't see how it affects you. Then you're at risk for taking things personally, and you're at risk for not hearing exactly what they were saying and not getting to know them just a little bit better so you can work with them a little more effectively. And it takes some practice, but you can do that. And ultimately, you're going to want to be a leader. You're going to want to be a mentor if you're not already. And it's really important for leaders and mentors to not take things personally when they're interacting with people. And that's one way to do it, is listen for how what somebody is saying is affecting them. Don't listen for how it affects you and what it means for your field. Mm-hmm. Am I addressing your question?
Yes. And I'm aware of that, and I'm definitely working on it. It's one of the things that needs to be worked on.
You have a big heart. You're going to be a great ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Emily, I know you have another question, but I want to get to some other folks who haven't had a chance to ask yet. So I'll come back to you in a second. So Heather, let's hear from you.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
Heather's in the car.
Yes, I'm in the car. I've got a friend driving. We're going to Disney right now because we're on winter break. But
Disney.
I work in a school setting, and I felt very confident, coming in, starting to work with kids. It's been 6 years of that now, and now I am starting to work with adults more, a lot more performance management type stuff. And I've learned that the contingencies with adults are sometimes a lot more complex than they are with kids.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, what advice do you have for someone that works to train people that maybe not ready to take on their position?
I'm not sure I got that question. They're not ready to what?
We have a lot of staff we have a school of 250 students with special needs and 140 staff.
Okay.
A lot of those staff are hourly staff that kind of come in with little to no experience in the field and have a lot to learn. And with those particular staff, I find that a lot of their motivation and their function of their behavior ends up detrimentally affecting students. So that's kind of where we're starting to make some changes. So how would you work with that?
Well, that just sounds like they're not doing a very good job. And that almost sounds like a human resources problem rather than a problem for you guys. Like if what they're doing, when you say harm, I'm not sure what you mean. They're harming students in what way?
I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say it's like physically harming.
Okay. I apologize. You're in and out, Heather. And I'm only hearing portions of what you're saying.
Hey, Pat. Yeah, I think what we'll probably do, if you have the gist of what she's getting at and can address that, let's just go with that.
Well, okay. So I took the word harm or not good for students maybe more seriously than I needed to. But if in fact somebody is engaging in practice at work that's harmful in a bona fide way to vulnerable clients, that's a human resources problem. It's a fireable offense. And so I would let the formal structure in the organization deal with it if that's what we're seeing. However, if what you're saying is harmful in that it's inconsistent with what we think is behaviorally optimal, well, that's a judgment call. And I would be very reluctant to use that language when you're giving the person feedback. Ultimately, you want them to be effective with the clients or the kids that are at the program or the adults that are at the program. And presumably you have some kind of an incentive system, probably not much, but maybe a little bit of an incentive system to get people marching in the right direction. I would use that as best you can. I don't know how many contingencies you have to work with, but they should all be composed in a way that favors what you want to see and doesn't favor what you don't want to see. And if you don't have that kind of a system, that's where I would go to work. I wouldn't go to work on the individuals as much as I would on the system, and try to get the decision makers to allow you to set up a structure for the program that favors the kind of thing you want to see and diminishes the payoff for things you don't want to see. I don't know. That's a very abstract answer, but I don't know exactly what the program. I don't know what it involves.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pat. I'm interrupting you.
Well, that'd be actually an elaborate story that might not even be on point. So go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. Brandon Franklin joins us. Brandon, do you want to ask?
Brandon.
Hey,
Brandon,
how are you? Good to see you.
Hey, man.
I know that you and I have talked a lot at length about soft skills. And I think that we as a field have always been very rigid and robotic in the way that we approach certain situations. And I'm glad to see that there's a lot of momentum that has been leading to us approaching situations in a more empathetic manner. And I think especially recently with a lot of the stories that you've been telling and a lot of the things have been coming into your talks, and I think you're becoming a leading voice for us in that aspect in our field. And number one, I really appreciate that. And number two, I was just wondering where a lot of your source, what you read, research, where you get a lot of your information, or where you could direct us to get better at using those soft skills with parents, schools, teachers, organizations, whoever we may be working with.
I've discovered this resource that people my age don't access probably as much as they should or could, and that people your age probably do, called YouTube. And I just can't believe the treasure trove of riches that are available on YouTube that pertain to this kind of thing. Every other video clip seems to have 5 steps for being more effective with people, 3 steps for opening up a conversation, 10 steps for making people like you. And you know what? Stuff like that seems a little off-putting at first blush, but there's always something in there. And here's what I think people should recognize. If it works, whatever it happens to be, it could be a sermon. It could be like a hot rock massage. It could be something a psychodynamically oriented therapist might say, or it could be something that we do. If it works, somewhere in there is an operative behavioral principle. And that's why it works. All that takes on our part is a willingness to accept the package that it comes in, even though it might be a little off-putting to us, and then go to work and try and find the essence of what's in there from a behavioral perspective and steal it. And recognize that the delivery vehicle for whatever it is, the stuff that we ordinarily object to, is probably really effective packaging. And that's one of the things that we've always been terrible at, is packaging our stuff. We just don't market very well. And I'll make two distinctions here, or make a distinction here between two markets. One is the scientific market. And when you market stuff to scientists, then the packaging should involve data and technical language, because that's the packaging scientists like. What we do is we take that same packaging and we use it for people that aren't scientists, and they don't like that packaging. And it's perfectly acceptable to use different packaging for people that are in a different market. In fact, it's preferable, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to market effectively. So back to YouTube, it's a treasure trove of stuff. Some of the stuff that's really valuable won't seem valuable because of a schmaltzy title for the video, but I recommend kind of mining what's there. TED Talks are great. And then a person's life. And I should have said that one first. You can just plow through your own life and find anecdotes and stories that have a behavioral principle embedded in them once you take a close look, and then use those stories. Those are the ones that involve you in particular, so they come across as very authentic. And the last thing I'll recommend is, one way to gather information on any kind of a question is to plant the question in your mind and walk around the world, and the world will give you answers. It's like when people have, let's say, a Land Rover. They see Land Rovers everywhere. They never see any Mercedes C300s because they don't have one. But they see Land Rovers because they're pre-programmed to see Land Rovers. That's just how that kind of mindset works. So you take a question, whatever it happens to be pertaining to what you want to talk about, put it in your mind, keep it there, and the world will start giving you answers to that question that you can put into some kind of a conversation.
I like that. Yeah, that definitely answered my question. I have just a real quick follow-up. What day are you flying into ABAI?
Probably Thursday.
All right. I'll see you then.
All right, man.
See ya.
So one of the things that came to mind, because I've been thinking a lot about soft skills lately as well. I actually have on my nightstand right now, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Great book.
And I want to, I think, to your point that you made a few minutes ago, Pat, I think we as behavior analysts kind of downplay the impact of some of those kind of consumer level books have. But, one of the things that struck me, and I'm not too far into it, but at least most of the first section of it all revolves around positive reinforcement. I mean, he quotes Skinner. I mean, he quotes Freud and other folks as well, but Carnegie, I believe, makes lots of references to just being a very reinforcing person, essentially, a dispenser of reinforcement. And one of the things I kind of want to do is kind of read a bunch of these books and try to distill some of the basic behavioral principles. One other quick point I'd like to make too, and this might be this is from like kind of the marketing world, but I think one of the things that you were saying that echoed with me is that as scientists or science-oriented people, we tend to look at things in terms of their features, and when you're trying to sell something to lay people, they want to know the benefits. And that's a very kind of tried and true kind of marketing adage. You sell the benefits, not the features. And one of the things that I've certainly learned over the years is that not everyone, and I should say many people, perhaps the majority of people, aren't swayed by scientific evidence or data or what have you.
Yeah.
That information is reinforcing to us as behavior analysts, but I find it oftentimes very unpersuasive when talking with people who aren't oriented towards those types of things.
There's a paper in, I think, the recent JABA. One of the authors is Keith Allen. And what they showed was that when parents are given a choice between process variables, basically being those soft skills that we're talking about, how they're greeted, quality of the phone calls, the quality of the exchange that's had before they go into the treatment session, and empirically supported treatment, they basically prefer sessions where the process variables are at a high level more than they do the presence of an empirically supported treatment, which tells me that they're more concerned about how they're going to be treated than they are about the treatment they're going to receive for their child. And it's just something to get better at, because we haven't emphasized process variables in teaching our students how to do treatments. We've just taught them how to do treatments. I train my staff on what to do in the waiting room, because that's where the appointment begins. As soon as a person, actually when the phone call into the clinic occurs is when treatment begins. And I want that phone call to be spectacularly pleasing to the person on the other end of the phone.
Yeah, makes total sense. And those are the things that are so easy to overlook when we're trying to figure out how to get prepared for a session or organize for a meeting or what have you. So, all right. So we're getting, so we have some folks on the call who haven't had a chance to ask a question yet. And yet we've got some folks who are in line to kind of ask their second question. So, and I also know that I don't want to keep Pat here all day. So I'm just trying to figure out how to make sure everyone gets their voices heard. And if not, we can kind of hit another question or two for people doing round 2 of their questions. And at the same time, look towards wrapping this up in a little bit.
Could we say go to 10:30? How about that? Is that enough time?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So having said that, I'm kind of looking at the chat here. All right. Looks like... All right, so whoever put a second question in there, go ahead and fire away. I think it's going to be either Celia or Emily, if I'm not mistaken. And they're way, way far up in the chat, so I'll let you guys decide who to go first.
Okay, my second one was just a question relating to dissemination. The internet is a wonderful thing, and it's also a horrible thing. It brings us lots of information, and it also brings us a lot of misinformation. And so I have kind of spent a lot of time over the last year really trying to help students online, especially in Facebook forums, like understand who are working through the BCBA process, understand the experience guidelines, and not get confused by things that are out there. And then along with that comes kind of all of the information and misinformation about ABA as a field, as a science, as a practice. There are a lot of people online who are very anti-ABA for very different reasons, some of which are personal, some of which are philosophical. Those things may be kind of sometimes in a separate world, but with everybody reading things online, we're now getting families that are coming to us having ABA been recommended by their pediatrician or the neurologist who diagnosed their child, but they're coming to us with a set of concerns about what might happen when we provide that therapy because of what they've read online. And so this gives me a more personal reason to pay more attention to disseminating ABA with anybody that I can, regardless of whether it's related to work or not. But when if I'm speaking to someone who doesn't know about it, that's pretty easy. But if I'm talking to people who are interested in listening but still feel very strongly against it, I'm trying to find kind of an easy way to start that interaction without sounding defensive, and yet addressing some of kind of the bigger picture, like people disagree that we should be intervening at all with children, especially with things like stereotypy. not understanding why we would want to do that for the child's benefit, and then also either misunderstandings or disagreements about specific interventions, some of which are because people have observed or heard about people implementing them really incorrectly, and some of which are misunderstanding what's being done when that happens. And so sometimes I'm just trying to kind of get a better idea in my head of how to handle these things so that I don't talk too much about the big picture, but I also don't want to get stuck arguing about small details in a punishment procedure. So I don't know if you have any suggestions about that in terms of, like your point of saying to listen to how people are feeling about what they're talking about rather than how it affects you. And I think that ties in well with this. But that's my question.
I don't think you're going to reason somebody out of something they weren't reasoned into. So if they feel strongly about it, that's an emotionally based repertoire. And if you come at that with an intellectual argument, you'll have a mismatch.
Right.
You might be able to come at them with an emotional argument, but it would have to have positive emotion in it, not negative emotion. But you might just consider letting your work speak for itself. So for the longest time, there was an anti-behavioral position pertaining to kids on the autism spectrum. And then Ivar Lovaas published a paper in the Journal of Clinical and Consulting Psychology in 1987 showing that the use of our methodology could not only remediate symptoms, but possibly eliminate them altogether, which spawned a huge opening for behavior analysis to start spreading that treatment around. He didn't argue with anybody. He just demonstrated that there was benefit. And I think that's the most potent possible argument. Is just produce good results and people will gravitate to whoever the source of those results. That's persuasive. But debating with somebody that potentially could be a troll online isn't going to do anything other than ruin your day.
Yeah, so I obviously that's different, and I've really avoided those conversations for that reason. I'm thinking more of people who actually want to talk about it in a productive way. So, for example, I have a new client that started recently, and they came to us open and ready to pursue ABA, but they already had kind of a list of things where they're like, well, we don't want you to do this, and we do want to do that, and a lot of those were based on what they'd read online and misconceptions. And so for us to kind of move forward, I had to take some time explaining when we would address those things and why, so that we could agree on goals for the treatment plan. It's more that situation that I'm talking about.
That's always going to be the case. I mean, Mont Wolf wrote a terrific paper in 1978 on social validity. And the point he made was that we have 3 points of agreement or disagreement with all our clients. One is on the nature of the problem, and that has to be settled. Are we looking at the same thing? And do we agree we're going to work on that? And if there is an agreement there, then don't go forward and try and work on something where you don't have agreement from your client that that's the problem. Then you need to negotiate what the intervention is going to be. And you have an idea of what you want to do. They have an idea what they don't want you to do. That has to be negotiated into some kind of a happy medium. And then what's the success going to look like? You have an idea, they have an idea, try and meet in the middle so you agree on all 3 things: the nature of the problem, the nature of the intervention, and what a success will look like. And if you get that kind of agreement, then you can make very good progress. If you don't obtain that kind of agreement, you might encounter obstacles you didn't even know were there, and resistance that you aren't sure the source of.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, Pat, it's 11:29. So let me close by just observing that you have, in many forums, recommended against doing Q&As when presenting, and you've just spent an hour and a half doing one. So I appreciate you getting out of your comfort zone to join us.
Well, can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Okay. I recommend against. I don't do Q&As after my presentations.
I know. I'm pulling your leg, but yes, go ahead.
Well, this didn't have a theme. And so I'm fine with answering questions when the questions don't deviate from the theme. But when I give a presentation, there's a theme, and then I take a question which has really not much to do with the theme, and now I'm just talking to one person, and why maybe 500 people are waiting, And the overall impact of the central message of my presentation is lost because I'm now caught up in this question. And when I get done talking, what I want to leave the room with is the message that I just delivered. And if people have questions for me, I want them to take them. I'll take them off to the side. But this is fine. This is not my discomfort zone. It's actually my comfort zone. I like answering questions, but not if they're going to interfere with the theme that I tried to produce.
Yeah, I get it. I was just kind of kidding around.
I appreciate you teasing me.
Yeah, and for those who want to hear more about your rationale for doing that, there's the behavior analyst to the front of the room article that you've written, and certainly the last appearance of the podcast. We went over that in quite a bit of detail. So, Pat, this has been a great way to spend a Saturday morning, especially on the heels of my son. His basketball team winning in overtime and me getting here just in time. Everyone else, thanks for joining me this morning too. Sorry for the little technical hiccup getting Zoom going. And I'll see you guys in the Facebook group. Pat, I will see you at ABBA hopefully, and we'll go from there.
Bye, everybody. See you, Matt.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
You bet. You bet.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.